hello, and welcome to our Analytics Breakthrough webinar series. We're excited to have Bobby Hewitt with us today. This is Faris Al-Halou with Enor, and with me as well, Eric Fatman, our co-author on the book, as well as our analytics trainer and coach. We're very excited to have Bobby Hewitt with us today. And go ahead, Eric, you want to introduce Bobby?
Sure. Welcome, everyone, to the webinar. Thank you for joining us. Very excited to have Bobby with us today. Bobby is a really unique voice in the area of conversion rate optimization. He's the president and founder of Creative Thirst, and Bobby and I know each other actually directly for years from the analytics space. So I've been very interested in all of the content and thought leadership that Bobby has put out. He was able to join us for our Evolve with Google Analytics conference in Boston a couple of years ago, and we were very happy that he was able to contribute to Google Analytics Breakthrough, our book that came out in September. Bobby also has the distinction of winning the Jim Novo Award for Academic Excellence for Web Analytics from the University of British Columbia Analytics Program. So very important honor. And in the course of the webinar today, if there are any questions for Bobby, please feel free to enter them into the question panel. This is a pretty open-ended discussion with Bobby, so please feel free to ask any questions that may come up during the course of the webinar. And the topic that we are talking about today is getting more out of split testing with documentation and post-test analysis. And this is a particularly compelling topic because I think a lot of us, when we're approaching testing, we're kind of familiar with the hypothesis generation aspect of testing. We had Chris Goward on a couple weeks back. Chris talked about hypothesis generation. Very interesting inputs there. Sometimes once you generate the hypothesis, once you run the test, once you determine a winner in the test, things sometimes can end too abruptly at that point. So in this webinar, Bobby is going to walk us through the importance of documentation as you're going into the test and after the test. And documentation, so much of what we do in analytics is very critical and really overlooked in a lot of situations. And also post-test analysis, how we're going to take the hypothesis that we generated before the test and bring it back into post-test analysis for really broader and deeper insights. So with that, we are going to officially welcome Bobby, and this is what we're viewing here is actually Bobby's contribution to the Google Analytics Breakthrough book. So with all that, Bobby, welcome, and tell us about documentation, test documentation, and post-test analysis.
Well, thanks, Eric. I'm really happy to be here, and thank you again for allowing me to contribute to the book. Post documentation is really vital, actually. A lot of us just kind of launch tests on the fly and just leave it to whatever testing tool we're using to store the data. And a lot of times the problem is that you change the page so many times, you reiterate the page in continuous testing, that it's really hard, one, to keep track of what was changed, the history of that test, and two, what the results have been across time. So with every test, I create a test document, and just for the sake of ease, personally I use Google Documents, Google Docs to create them all in. But I know some other testing practitioners that use other tools like Evernote. As long as you choose what specific tool you're going to use and just use that one primary tool, the tool doesn't really matter.
So, and you actually create a separate Google document for each test that you run, and you use a consistent template.
Exactly. Yep, that's correct.
Okay.
And that template is available. I believe there was a link in the contribution in the book.
Okay, we will
so
make
there's
sure
a
to
template
include that in
down.
the follow-up for the webinar as well.
Perfect. Yeah, and so the template basically is just the one warehouse of all the data, not only the test data, right? Not only the results of how much the conversion rate improved or how much it didn't improve, but also everything, like including the dates that the test ran, the primary metric that you're looking to measure here, the goal, any background information, which is vital. Right? Background information is really the context around the test itself. Right? Did you run it during a seasonal slump? Did you run it during a particular time where you have a lot of sales? And really, what was the previous test that you ran before this? So that you can sort of get an understanding of the context of what had happened. You know, when the reasons why you're running this? Are you running this to verify a previous test, or are you running this based on an outcome of a previous test? Did the previous test lead you somewhere, and now you're looking to further verify with this test? So it's really a living, breathing document during the length of the test, and it even has the variables and the values that you're testing, you know, describing what it is that you're specifically changing, the URLs that you're using, the traffic source.
Bobby, do you recommend that you actually take screenshots of the variations and include those in this document?
Absolutely. At the end of the test document, I always include screenshots of all the variations because, again, things change so frequently. And going back to like your web tool or your testing tool is not really always the best idea, because especially if you're doing an A/B test that's using the WYSIWYG feature, let's say, for example, if you've made a slight change, it's just going to pull from that URL. And if you've made any changes on that URL, the WYSIWYG editor is going to just take the current changes. So by putting a screenshot in your test document, you're basically locking it in and saying this is actually what it looked like.
Right, and the tools can change a lot on the Google end. You know, not that long ago we were using Google Website Optimizer, then it was Content Experiments within Google Analytics, and now all the testing energy, of course, is going to Google Optimize, so you don't even, or you might migrate among different tools just for your own purposes, so you don't probably want to rely on a specific tool to maintain your testing history.
That's 100% correct. I've had many clients that have migrated to different tools over the years, and they don't have a specific, you know, one resource to go back to look at tests. Once they leave that one tool, all that information is gone because they never created any test documentation to go along with each test.
Right. So, Bobby, looking at the scenario that we have in the book, so we have two different. Actually, can you walk us through this a bit?
Yeah, sure. So in the scenario in the book, we presented a sort of a fake test, and what we were testing here was the treatment of the testimonials on a fictitious page. So on the control page, we had a pretty standard testimonial treatment, more like an Amazon type of look with a star rating, a headline, and then the actual testimonial, and then the person who gave you that testimonial, you know, very much like Amazon. And then in the treatment, we were testing a more Facebook-like visual layout and design, right? So a like component, a thumbs up, thumbs down, an image of the person, and really we were testing, you know, which type of treatment would have the better impact on conversion. Would a more social proof treatment work that's more Facebook orientated, or would a more traditional sort of e-commerce Amazon style have a bigger improvement?
And Bobby, even though we're not primarily talking about hypotheses in this discussion, I guess we can't have any testing discussion without really talking about hypotheses at the same time. But what typically would have this hypothesis been based on? So could we say that the hypothesis is that the Facebook style testimonials, we have a reason to believe that those would perform better, and if so, what would have been our impetus for the test?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, you're right. You can't really talk about testing without talking about hypothesis. And the hypothesis for this test would be something like this. If social media plays a factor in social proof, then more visitors will buy from our XYZ product as measured by conversion rate.
Right, so the more you tie it into actual social proof, whereas the star rating may be a little bit more anonymous, where you actually have something that looks more social, tied to individuals, that may create more credibility.
Exactly. So both of the treatments both play a factor in social proof, which is a good thing, right? Because that's ultimately what we're testing here. The primary question is will social proof make a difference? And then the hypothesis is which treatment of those social proof would make a difference. And it really is asking the question, the audience of this sales page, are they more inclined to be influenced by social proof in a more, I guess, social, with air quotes around it, social Facebook style, or are they more influenced by social with more traditional e-commerce / Amazon type style?
Right. And you never know. You never know. That's why we have to. That's why we have to test. And yeah, I'm sure you have seen in your experience that people in all roles in an organization can have very strong feelings about one treatment or another, and it's only the testing that will provide some data-based evidence as to what is really performing. And when we'll talk further about the additional analysis that you do, that provides even additional backing as to what really is working and what's not.
Absolutely. It really comes down to putting your ego aside and really judging by the numbers. Letting the numbers decide rather than letting your ego decide as to which version you like. It's not about what you like, it's about what's going to move the needle, what's going to be most effective.
And Bobby, just to look at the actual documentation for this test that we feature in the book, let's look at the naming convention, because a lot of things start with naming, and a lot of things sometimes just a naming convention can be really critical in getting things off to the right start in terms of structure.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. This is the structure that I follow, and I follow it for a couple different reasons. And the naming convention starts really with the product or category that you're testing, then a descriptive name of the test that describes what it is you're testing, and then the classification, if you will, the test category. So in this example, we're testing a fictitious skin cream detail page, and we are testing Facebook-style testimonials, and we're testing to see if social proof would include it. And then after that, I have a test number that I assign every test, which is the first three letters of the company, followed by a -001. And I just keep incrementally increasing that, 002, 003, as we do more and more testing. So that over time, we build up a library. And the other key thing I do with this naming convention is that I'll use that test ID number, that 001, across everything. Excuse me. So it'll be the name of the test document. It'll also be the name of the test in Visual Website Optimizer or Optimizer or whatever tool we're using, so that I can then cross-reference between all different sources.
Right.
If I'm making any annotations that I'm making in Google Analytics, I'll just use that reference ABC001, so that I'll know that's the date that test ran, and I could just quickly and easily search for it by test ID in Google Docs. It just makes it a lot easier to connect all the different pieces together.
And Bobby, for the test category or classifications, what are other classifications that you might use? What are general areas that you would test in typically?
Social proof is one. For example, another one might be value proposition. Another might be a test based on friction, if we're trying to reduce friction. Another one might be on anxiety, if we're trying to reduce anxiety. So it's basically a classification. There's a little peek into the hypothesis. So
Right,
this way,
right.
this way you can basically list out all of your test names, and at a glance you can pull up, all right, give me all the tests we run that we did on social proof, or all the value proposition tests, and this way you could just pull it from your library that much easier.
Yeah, that's interesting. Those are interesting classifications for different types of tests, because I think sometimes we tend to kind of merge all those. We look at maybe anxiety and friction, and is kind of the same thing, but I think it sounds like it's an interesting way to classify the test, to say that this is specifically about social proof, or this is specifically about anxiety, or this is specifically about friction, even though there may be some overlap between those types of classifications. I think it's interesting to pull those out as specific focus areas for testing.
Yeah, if you can, right, if you are testing just one sort of classification, but in many cases you're right, you are testing a lot of different things at the same time. For that type of classification, I refer to those as variable clusters. So anything with variable cluster in it, I know, has multiple changes. And when you're doing a variable cluster test, what you want to do is you want to make sure all the changes that you're changing are supporting the one hypothesis, so that you can get further insight. That's the downside of doing a variable cluster. You can't point specifically to one specific thing that had an impact. But the theory is that by changing many elements, you're correcting for a lot of sins, and you're going to have a bigger shift, either up or down.
But make sure, even if it's multivariate, make sure you're focusing on one hypothesis.
Always, yes.
Okay. Okay.
Thanks, Bobby. This is really insightful, and I do want to just remind our participants, if you have a question, please go ahead and enter it. We'll ask those questions, ask Bobby in a few minutes. But I want to, this reminds me of early on in when this industry was forming, maybe, I don't know, 10, 15 years ago, testing and analytics. There's a lot of debate, and maybe there's still some today about about technology, right? And we're not going to take sides here. The book is about good analytics. We love good analytics, but we do work with other technologies. But there's, I think, even to date, there's still a lot of, I think, overemphasis on technology, and then people and processes sort of get overlooked in terms of budget, or maybe under appreciated or under budgeted. So when this resonated with me so well when you talk in the book about the importance of documentation, because people, documentation might not sound too sexy of a process or of an effort, but with changes in organizations, with changes in technologies, people move around. If you don't have a good process that's well documented, it's really, really difficult to build a practice, whether it's an analytics practice or testing optimization practice. Is that your observation too?
Absolutely, because there's all that sort of knowledge, right, that's trapped inside the optimizer's head, whether that be an in-house optimization person or an external team, right? And once that in-house person leaves, or once they hire a different team, all that knowledge is gone, right? That's why the client always walks away with owning these test documents, so they could either pass on to whoever takes the next seat in that position, and they can catch up really quickly, because they could just basically read, okay, here's what was done, and here's the learnings and insight that was gained, and now they can pick up the ball and start running that much faster.
Yeah, excellent, thank you.
And Bobby, looking at some of the specific elements of the testing document, so we have a sample here. So can we just walk through some of these specific elements, because I think some of these elements are expected, and some of them may be a little bit less expected, like maybe the variables or the fact that we have primary question and primary metric, and the fact that we're calling these out as separate elements. So could you just walk us through this test document?
Yeah, absolutely. Let's see. Let's start from. I guess we'll start with the primary metric, right? So in some cases, conversion rate may not be the metric that we're measuring here, and that's vital to know in the test because that's how we're judging this particular test. In other cases, it could be the average order value as the primary metric. In some cases, it could just be the opt-in. So that's what I really mean by primary metric. And again, it's just to have it at a glance so that we could look at the test document and say, okay, now I know exactly what this test wanted to accomplish. And the primary question really is a little bit different than the hypothesis. The primary question really states in the form of a question. It always starts with the which type of question. Like which testimonial treatment will get more visitors to buy, right? Which opt-in headline will get more visitors to click. It's always in the case of a which statement, and then the hypothesis is different than the primary question because the primary question is really just making sure that we've thought about the test and approached the test in the right way, and that we're not asking too much of the test, because if you can't state it in a which statement, then you're likely testing too many elements or changing too many things or not structuring the test properly. And the hypothesis is really different from the primary question. The hypothesis is basically, if we change this, then this will happen. Where the primary question is really the thing that we're changing. Does that kind of make sense?
So the primary question kind of validates the hypothesis in a way to make sure that the hypothesis can actually be proven by the test?
Yes, exactly. It helps you create a testable hypothesis statement.
Okay. And the treatments?
Yeah, so the treatments and the variables and the values are very, very important that many optimizers really overlook, probably because they weren't really classically trained in testing. And treatments is really a combination of the test changes that we're changing, right? So in our example where you show the two versions, those are the treatments. And within the treatments, we may have changed several different elements. And when we did, right, one had the 5 stars, another had a picture. There was a lot of different elements when you really, really think about it. It wasn't really just changing the way it looked. And those elements within the treatment comes down to variables and values. And the variable is really the general element that you want to test. This could be a headline, this could be an image, and the value is the way you're expressing that element.
Right.
And the treatment is the combination of the variables and values together.
Right, and you want to make sure to document all those specifically, and even if you have a screenshot of the treatment, you would want to call out the specific values that could populate a variable.
Exactly. And in the book, the contribution sort of outlines basics of what those might be. Headline, image, price, things like that.
And looking at the traffic source, this is interesting. From a documentation standpoint, and also just from an overall methodology standpoint, do you advocate for testing only a specific traffic source?
When you can, the majority of the case, you can't, because you don't have enough traffic from one particular source. It's usually a combination of sources. But each source will have a different effect, and each source will act differently. So it's important to at least note what traffic sources were included, even if it's multiple traffic sources, because you can run a secondary test based on this outcome and not realize that the traffic source has changed since the last time you tested this, and now the outcomes are different, and you're kind of wondering why.
Right.
And that's why you go back to the test documentation and say, oh, well, here's the reason why. Because we were running it with email promotion traffic, in-house list traffic, which converts better, and this follow-up test where you're using cold traffic or Facebook traffic.
Right. And that could even be a basis for personalization as well. If you see that Facebook traffic and email traffic behave very differently in your test, that could be an indicator that maybe you need to be serving different experiences to the different visitors from the different traffic sources.
Absolutely. And in this fictitious test that we're looking at, it could be that since the traffic source was Facebook, they're more aligned or inclined to be influenced by a Facebook-style testimonial than a traditional style.
Right.
So the traffic source also helps to sort of enhance your insights.
Right.
So just a question here. I know we're getting close to the end of the webinar. In terms of the test document or the template, Bobby, Eric, we have a link, and we'll add a link to this at the end of when we put a blog post up on the recording. We will put a link to the template and make sure it's on the GA book page as well.
Yeah, we will make sure to include those links. And Bobby, certainly before we conclude, we want to take a look at your decision insight framework. So I think what's particularly interesting about this is that we're bringing the hypothesis back in at the end of the test. So we're not just saying, okay, we said we think green button is going to perform better than red button. Green button had a 5% higher conversion rate. Done. We're opening up a whole other phase of testing here. So could you talk a little bit more about this framework?
Absolutely. Yeah, this is where, again, most practitioners usually stop at the test outcome, right? Do we have a lift? And yes, we did. Great. Everybody's happy. But in many cases, it's really the value of a test is really in the learning that you gain. So once a test is completed, it's not done, right? Then you have to update your test document. You have to update your insights. You have to update your results. But this framework really takes the outcome, brings it back to the hypothesis, right? Was the outcome in alignment with the hypothesis? Did the outcome match what we thought would happen? And if it did or didn't, kind of almost doesn't matter. It takes us to the next phase, which is the evidence. So then we look for evidence to support the behavior, and the behavior to support the evidence. So if this did occur or if this didn't occur, then why, right? And in that why is the back and forth between the behavior and the evidence stage, which we can get into, some specific tools that we use for that. Heat maps, screen recordings, all taken during the test. A lot of people use these tools prior to a test to figure out what to test, but they're also really valuable during the test itself, where then it becomes even easier to separate the 2 or 3 different versions of the page and specifically look and compare the different heat maps and the different results. And that's when you kind of infer a lot of the behavior. And it's from that inference of behavior and looking for that evidence to validate the hypothesis that you then get really the insight and the learnings about the customers or the traffic source.
So Bobby, that's interesting. The idea of using heat maps during a test is interesting because, as you mentioned, I think a lot of us look at heat maps and analytics and different types of qualitative input as a basis for a hypothesis, but we wouldn't necessarily think of using a heat map during a test itself. So just from a logistical standpoint, if you're running a test, if you have multiple variations, let's say that you have three treatments that are showing up under the same URL in a heat mapping tool, how would you be able to distinguish one treatment from another?
Well, it kind of depends on how you built those treatments. So what I always strive for is 3 separate unique URLs. I don't really like using the WYSIWYG editors a lot of times. I'll rebuild the page so that each one will have its unique URL. That makes it a lot easier to look at heat maps for a specific page. It makes it a lot easier to even put some surveys on different pages. And it also makes it a lot easier to implement a winner because the page already exists.
Interesting. Okay, so you prefer, as an overall approach, you prefer redirects to separate URLs rather than dynamic.
Yep, I do.
Oh, okay. Okay, interesting. Interesting. Does that, and I guess that would also eliminate any chance of flicker, I guess, which is,
Yep, exactly, exactly. So it doesn't have to load that first page and then reload the different elements that you've changed because it's a completely different page.
right. Interesting. And just to bring it back to the insight where we want to get to. Do you have some examples of insights that you've achieved through going these extra steps with the decision insight framework that you would not have achieved, or that your clients would not have achieved if you had just stopped at, okay, here's the winner of the test?
Yeah. So a lot of insights can really get very deep. One particular test insight I had where it was for a supplement company, and the testimonial in this particular test had mentioned the person, really thinking this stuff really works. He was convinced that this stuff really worked because when he stopped taking it, he felt the negative effects from not having it. And the insight that we gained there was that actually was a negative rather than a positive, because based on the behavior and evidence that we saw from people, and really going deep into one-on-one customer interviews and surveys, we found that they interpreted that testimonial as meaning that the product was addictive, meaning that you couldn't stop taking it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Whereas when I first read this testimonial, I thought it was great. It's like, yeah, this is fantastic. This is proof that this stuff actually works, right? But the person on the other end didn't interpret it that way at all. They
Interesting.
interpreted it as a negative rather than a positive. So again, then we based another test off of that, removed that one section of the testimonial, and got another lift out of it.
Okay. So, and that goes,
Excellent.
yeah.
Well, we're coming to the end of the webinar, Bobby. Really appreciate your input and your insight. And again, I encourage our participants here and those who will listen to the recording to check out Bobby's section in the book. Again, it talks about documentation, talks about an important piece of the building a practice, establishing an optimization practice. So I encourage you to follow his advice on this. Any final comments, Eric?
Just thank you, Bobby. I know that there's a lot more that we can talk about, and there is a lot more that Bobby does have to offer. So make sure to check out creativethirst.com, and if you want to ping Bobby directly, here is his email address. And of course, to see Bobby's contribution in GA Breakthrough, Google Analytics Breakthrough, we encourage you to get the book, and also to stay connected with Enor in general. Here is our blog, and we will have other webinars coming up in our Analytics Breakthrough webinar series. So thank you very much, Bobby, for joining. Any final thoughts? Any final one big takeaway for everyone on testing?
Documentation. It's not sexy, but it's really where you're building an asset of information.
Yeah, I was going to use that term too. I think kind of when we decided to focus, all of us, when we decided to focus on analytics and testing, well, testing can be a little bit sexy. Analytics, maybe not. But we have a commitment to focus on things that maybe get overlooked, and certainly documentation gets overlooked. Even honestly, annotations within Google Analytics, even making simple notes, can sometimes be the difference between insight and lack of insight, and that certainly is, Bobby has demonstrated, certainly the case with testing. So thanks again very much, Bobby. A lot of other things that we could talk about, but we are at the end of our of our webinar today. Everyone stay connected with us, stay connected with Bobby, and hope to see everyone again on future webinars, and we will make sure to distribute Bobby's resources in the webinar follow-up as well.
Thanks so much, Bobby.
Thank you.
Right. Thanks, everyone. Have a good one. Bye-bye.